I am director of the Bangor Public Library, and I'm also the president of the League of Women Voters of Maine. Sorry that we have such a small audience today, but this will be available on podcast and on YouTube. So I think it's a very important discussion that we're having. This is a third in the series that we've had between independent candidates and members of the party. To welcome us, and I want to thank Eastern Maine Community College for allowing us to have this session here today. And to welcome us to campus is Tim Conrad.
Thank you, President Barrett. I am not the president here. President Barrett was detained, so I've been a dean here for 17 years. So I guess I was next in line. So I'd like to begin by welcoming you all here. The faculty, staff, and students are very engaged citizens. We push that on our students as much as we can. And the political process, we're very happy that you're here. We are welcome to the exchange of ideas that you bring. We're glad that you chose the MCC to make us part of this process, and if there's anything we can do to help out, we certainly would like to do that. So without further ado, thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please let me know, and thanks again.
We asked the panelists to come up with questions because the first panel we had was, no, I can't remember. We had the independent candidates and elected officials speak. The second panel we just had the party leaders speak. This time we have the groups together, and we hope that there will be a dialogue. This is not about people, it's not about political ideas, it's how the system works. The League of Women Voters was very interested in this because we have found that in Maine, as well as across the nation, there are more unenrolled voters than there are in any one political party. We see this as something different over the years, and it was an experience we wanted to study. This is what the League does. I am going to act as the timekeeper. We are going to try to stay to an hour, so we will not ask every question, but our eminent MC will decide what question. But we will take questions from every member of the panel. There will be one question from every member of the panel. So I will turn the whole thing over to Mark Kelley. Mark is with WZON, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Barbara. And I would like to thank you and the League and Joe Pickering for continuing this series. I think it is a tremendous service to our community, and we'll always come up with great panelists who really bring us some very, very important thoughts about this whole process of the American system and the voting franchise. And I welcome the chance to feel sort of like I'm sitting at the scorer's table at a basketball game because I get to introduce all these people. And why don't I get right to that and stop using up that valuable time what we're talking about. Right beside me is Betsy Garrold. She is representing the Maine Green Independent Party, raised in Maine in a Goldwater Republican household, which she still admits to. She voted for, oh man, I'm going to be in trouble now. Earlier this week I offended the bee whisperers. I mean, I really didn't.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, I know. He came buzzing into the station yesterday and gave me what for. Actually, very delightful man. She voted for the first time in hometown elections on her 18th birthday. She has always said her political autobiography would be titled, I Was a Teenage Republican. Years later, after serving in the United States Public Health Service in Cleveland, Ohio, and is it Majuro? Majuro, Republic of the Marshall Islands, she returned to Maine and bought the farm. I thought that had a different meaning, but that's okay. If it works for you, it works for me. She registered as a Green Independent and the legislature in 2002 and served as the state party co-chair for 3 years. She currently serves on several nonprofit boards, including as president of Food for Maine's Future. Welcome, Betsy. Next to Betsy is Jill Goldwaith, four-time independent state senator from Bahada. She was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tonga worked as an emergency room nurse at Mount Desert Island Hospital, and served on the Bar Harbor Town Council for 9 years prior to running for Maine State Senate. She recently retired as Director of Government Relations for Jackson Laboratories. Welcome, Jim. Next down the line, we have Ben Grant, Chair of the Maine Democratic Party. Ben is a graduate of the University of Maine School of Law. Prior to joining McTeague Higbee, Ben worked in state government and electoral politics as an aide to State Senate Presidents Beth Edmonds and Beverly Daggett. His connection to Maine runs deep. His father hails from Millinocket and his mother from Bar Harbor. He lives in Portland with his wife and 2 daughters. Ben, thanks very much for coming up to this. Jason Savage is Executive Director of the Maine Republican Party. He was the Executive Director of Maine People Before Politics, a nonprofit membership-based organization focused on improving Maine's future by stepping out and away from special interests. He led Governor Paul DePage's political organization in his run for governor. Savage worked at Martin's Surplus and Salvage for nearly 10 years in various roles until early 2011. The governor obviously recognized your many talents and took you along for the ride. Welcome, Jason. Ben Sprague is an independent Bangor City Councilor. After receiving his degree from Harvard, Ben worked for the Boston Red Sox. Couldn't have any better credentials than that. and taught high school diploma, career development, and computer classes in Massachusetts. Realizing the error of his ways, he moved back to Bangor, where he is a financial advisor with Means Investment Company. Again, welcome back, Ben. All right, let's get right to the questions. We'll start with Betsy's question, and I think maybe the simplest way to do this is to let the person who submitted the question answer first, and then we'll just go down the line and you can all weigh in. Barbara, did you want them to approach the microphone?
If they could use the microphone,
so
I think it would be good.
everybody can hear you, if you would. Betsy, so assume the position that
You don't think that we can?
Is there a way to pass the mic?
Well, I think
We
for,
tried and that didn't work.
are we okay for the streaming feed if she stays where she is?
We can hear her.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can project. If you need me to project.
Okay, all right.
Okay, fine.
All right, here is Betsy's question. What 3 reforms would you propose to improve the election process and increase voter confidence in our government, and why? Betsy, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I came up with 7. And so that's a pretty steep curve, but I think that the top 3 would be instant runoff voting, so that you could do ranked choice voting in the voting booth on election day. It wouldn't be any more costly because you wouldn't be having a second round of elections. You would just go. Does everyone understand how ranked choice voting goes? I mean, this is a pretty intelligent audience, I think. Okay, so that would be my first reform. My second reform, and this is one that I've thought for a long time would be very helpful, would be computerized redistricting. Take the partisan politics right out of redistricting. Stop these spaghetti gerrymandered districts, and just have a computer do it. I'm sure there's at least one computer program that can do that. And then the most important, of course, is getting the money out of politics, campaign finance reform, to stop having corporations be people and money be free speech, and go to a strong, robust, clean elections system like we once had here in the state of Maine, and no longer have, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Jill?
Well, my answers are similar to Betsy's. Open primaries would be big on my list. The taxpayers pay for primary elections, and yet we're not permitted to vote in them. And there is one state at least questioning the constitutionality of that fact. So if we independents could vote in primary elections, we might end up with candidates who are somewhat more appealing to a broader section of the population, rather than candidates who tend to be kind of toward the extremes of their party, and then may or may not do well in the general election. Redistricting is also on my list. My worry about computerizing it is who would write that software. But I think that there are ways that that can be done, even if it's a commission that's non-legislators. But the way redistricting happens in Maine now is the legislature gets the first crack at it, and then only if they can't agree does a court get involved. But they can then, they're free to create districts in a trade-off way, so that we'll make these 7 Democratic districts, if we make these 7 Republican districts. So that's not a good solution, the fact that they have to agree. And then some form of instant runoff, ranked choice, or something. Maine has, I think, the luxury of elections with many candidates, but sometimes that divides the vote so many ways that I don't know that we've had a majority governor since Governor King's second election. So some way of getting to someone with a majority vote, whether it's instant runoff, ranked choice, or some other form of voting, would be my view.
All right, thank you. Ben Grant.
I'm not going to need the 2 minutes because I don't think we need to improve the election process. This is a process that has worked in this country for going on 240, 50 years. I don't think because we're disappointed with the results recently, we need to change the rules. I think we need to engage with the candidates in the process that we have and try to reform the results that way.
All right, you didn't need 2 minutes. Jason Savage.
I think I'll come at it from a slightly different angle than Ben, but at the same time I'll first say, I don't think that there are dramatic problems with our election process. I do have a couple of ideas I think would make it better. I think actually our citizens referendum process could be in some ways utilized more, because I think we put a lot of things on autopilot through referendums, and that I'd like to see, generations of voters in the future revisit some of those things, so that especially if it involves spending money. I'd like to, if in 1973 our electorate decided they wanted to spend X number of dollars, and I guess in the legislature and they're increasing the funding every 2 years or whatever, I'd like to actually see that go back to the people that are paying the bill now to vote on it again. I think that has to have a sunset provision in the referendum process. I also think that we talk a lot about money in politics. I think that what we've learned over the last last decade at least is the harder you try to get the money out of politics, the more you do is just push it underground where nobody can see it. So I think you just increase the transparency of the money that's getting spent in your elections and open it up so that anybody can go to one central location, and whether it's a
Jill, did you?
Well, if you're going to ask Ben Grant's next question.
Yes, I am.
do that then.
Okay, very good. Let's move right on to that. And Ben will be the first to be able to explain what he was thinking in asking this question, and that is, why is there no independent party in Maine? Ben?
Yeah, I almost asked that as a rhetorical question. I sort of gave my answer just now, preempting myself. But I think the point is that for folks who are unenrolled in a party, they have available to them the process to create a party. If you want to have a socially liberal, fiscal conservative party, you don't think the party represents you, there's a way to do that. I'm not saying that it's easy. You have to go out and collect a number of signatures, a lot of signatures, and to have a convention, have a platform, and such things like that under state law. But there is a mechanism by which you can have an independent party, independent candidates, ballot access that way. Look, the Green Party has done it. It's not impossible. I don't think that we need to make the rules such that it's so easy for everyone when there is a process involved. Democracy is something that's hasn't been handed to us, something we've got to work for. And I view that's sort of at the heart of my question is, if people are so concerned that there isn't this option, well, you can go out and create one. And I don't know that the rest of us should bend the rules because we've chosen to do something else.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
I actually would say something similar, is that there's no prohibition in our current system on creating a party. If you want one, it's there for you, the options are there. My experience working with voters, independent voters are not, monolithic, one-minded, five-minded, voting bloc. They all believe very different things. And one of the things that we are always challenged to do, in Maine especially, I think in Maine parties are more good at doing this, with Maine parties, is that we are always looking to understand how independent voters feel and where their positions are, because we want to attract them. It's a market of ideas, and we're trying to put forward our, the ideas that align with our principles, but that attract independent voters. I would hope, and I believe, and I said this in the last panel, that we're doing a better job of that than we have in the past, and we listen to independents. But there are certain ways we do not have a monopoly. Ben said the Green Party is proof, and there was another party not long ago that went through the work. The real thing is that if you're trying to build an organization around a fractious electorate, and your platform doesn't appeal to a large enough number of people to maintain that access, then the problem is in the idea of what your leadership is doing, because people coalesce around ideas in a party. So I would say there's no prohibition. It's a matter of if anybody wants to do it, finding the people to do it, and doing the actual work, the wrench time, to put all the nuts and bolts together and make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
I'm pleased that there's so much agreement between Ben and Jason.
It's a rare forum.
Yes, it's just way too happy down this end of the table. I think the term independent.
Go ahead. You can upset the.
Bring us some unhappy.
I think that probably not on this question, but the term independent party is kind of an oxymoron, I think, because as soon as an independent party were formed, people would start doing what any party-minded people do, which is using the party structure to exclude certain viewpoints or to set themselves off from others. And I think that would be kind of or be less productive, counterproductive. That's the term I'm looking for, counterproductive. I'm sorry to say, I'm in like the fog of baby right now. And I'm struggling to find the words to say to these questions, but I do think, however, that the two-party system is basically ingrained in American politics today, and I don't know why that is. It's just the way it is. I work as an investment advisor, financial retirement planner in my day job, and we sometimes look for companies to invest in that have what's called a moat of competition. That is to say, if I gave Jason $50 billion, he could never create a company that could compete with Coca-Cola or Pepsi, just because those companies are already so ingrained.
Better try them.
I have fun trying.
So I think I've been wondering why the two-party system is so ingrained. I think it's just, we have kind of an us versus them mentality in the country, and we're right, they're wrong, no matter what party you're in. And it's reinforced through everything. So it would have to be a great unwinding of this complex political structure we have now to create an opportunity for a third party to really emerge and be successful. But I do think independents in Maine have a tremendous amount of clout. If you look at the most successful politicians in Maine in the last 50 years or more, the most successful ones are the ones that win the middle ground, the most valuable ground in politics. Susan Collins, Lindsay Snow, John Baldacci. These were centrist people that Democrats could reach to the center-right folks, and Republicans who could reach to the center-left folks, and a lot of folks who consider themselves in the middle. So I am doubtful that an independent party will really emerge in Maine, but I'm proud that in Maine we are very independently minded and have a strong role to play in the process.
All right, thank you. Betsy?
Okay, I'm going to bring the unhappiness. All right, I think it's a little disingenuous for the two major parties to say it's easy to be a party, because trust me, from the one small third party in the state, I know how hard it is to be a party. We are the Green Independent Party exactly for the reason that the hurdles are so high. We were the Maine Green Party, and then we got decertified, or whatever the word is. I'm struggling for words here too much. And then Pat LaMarche got us our ballot status back again, but we couldn't have the same name that we had had before, so we had to stick independent in the middle of it. So to say that the bar for becoming a party, that it's not difficult or that you can do it, yeah, you can do it, but it is not easy. And we spend a lot of our energy and time as a small party just trying to stay a party, just trying to keep our names on the voter registration cards and on the ballot. So, not that easy. Now, the other thing about this is that I spent 3 years as the chair of the Green Party, and that was herding cats, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to form an independent party. I mean, Hightower says that anyone who doesn't know how to herd cats has never heard of a can opener, but it's pretty hard to find that can opener sometimes, and so I can't imagine that the independents in Maine would ever get organized enough to go through the very difficult process of becoming a staying in the party.
All right, thank you. Jill?
Well, this is one of my favorite subjects because I don't want to be in a party. And the reason I'm not in a party is because I am not keen on the way the parties approach things. If independents were to become a party, we would have to have conventions, we would have to raise money. Those are all the things that cause me to be an independent rather than a party member. The fact that we are not hive-minded, that's a great phrase, I'm stealing it now, is not really any different than the parties. I mean, the Republican Party has such a deep fracture now that it's creating serious problems as far as the party kind of getting on with life. And similarly, although maybe not with quite so clear labels, Democrats have really, really different points of views on things, and yet they schlep along. And so I think independents bring an important perspective. I think it was Jason said something about trying to attract independent voters. Here I am, attract me. I would, absolutely. I've got a Republican senator and a Democratic representative in my district, and I love them both, and I hope they both win re-election. I'd be happy to do what I can to help with that. So if there is a candidate coming out of a party that appeals to me, I am more than happy to support them and work for them. The problem is there isn't always that candidate. And there are times when independents, I think, are moved to support or try to find an independent candidate. And I won't refer to this election, but you know, when Senator King, Senator King, he is now Governor Senator King, ran, that was, I think, out of a desire, both on his part and on the electorate's part, to have an alternative to the people who are running from the parties. So I'm perfectly happy to support party candidates if the candidate is somebody who appeals to me. And then there was a question about bending the rules. I don't want to bend any rules, but I think in some cases there should be a few new rules. And why the two-party system is ingrained, because the parties control the electoral system, so they can't, they don't want to open that door to.
Jason?
That's just not true, because you take a look at the reforms we implemented 3 years ago, in large part to help the Green Party. You know, in the old days, you had to get a certain percentage of the vote. Your candidate for governor had to get a certain percentage of the vote. We changed that. So now all the Green Party has to do to remain a party is to have a certain number of its voters actually participate. Now, I think that's an easier barrier for them to clear. It doesn't require them to find a candidate to run for governor. And it's a better reflection of their strength. So I would just disagree with the premise of that.
Jason, do you want to continue the love fest here with Ben?
I don't know.
No?
I'm probably not going to
Oh.
say. I actually want to talk about how, I hope nothing I said made it so that there was an impression that it was easy to gain status as a party, because I don't believe I said anything like that, and it wasn't my intent. I think when I made my wrench time comment and the nuts and bolts, nothing I've ever accomplished in politics was easy. Anything worth doing was very hard. All I was saying is that the mechanisms are there. And so there was, hopefully there was no impression that we were saying it was easy to get party. I know how hard it is to maintain, you know, a status just as Betsy does. So I didn't want to leave that. I also wanted to address the statement about the party, our party having deep fractures. We have very big differences, and we're working. You know, there have been times in the past, but I think that era is over, and that's why I want to talk to Jill afterwards, because we can have a great conversation about her perspective. You know, the parties don't control our elections. People control our elections. People show up and vote, and money doesn't make them vote a certain way. And I want to reject the idea that parties are in control of things, because people, yes, you can. You can show up and vote. Yeah.
I don't want to.
People control our elections with their votes. There is no other mechanism to control Maine elections than votes. I just want to clarify that.
And I apologize if I misunderstood you, gentlemen, but I'm sorry. That's what I heard was you saying that it wasn't difficult.
No, there's a map to doing it, but it's certainly not an easy map with gentle terrain.
And as far as the changes in the rules, I think that was to the advantage of the two major parties. And I'm not saying we didn't take advantage of it to say to keep our party status, but not having a green in the election certainly. In the gubernatorial election certainly decreases the amount of ways the votes can go, and so I see it again as something that's kind of an advantage for the two major parties.
Okay. And Jason, I just want to thank you for explaining what's actually going on in the Republican Party. It's not a medical problem. It's not a fracture. It's an ideological problem. You have differences of opinion. Is that?
Well, I think that everybody sees it as if right now the party is like so divided that there's no unity. And anybody who C4 that's spending money on an election or a PAC or a candidate, you just open that up so that it's much more transparent for people to see. Then they can see who's funding the people on the ballot and make a decision on that. I think that we've made the mistake of every time we try to reform money in politics, we just drive the big money deeper and deeper into the shadows. So, those are my thoughts on that.
All right. Thank you, Ben Sprague.
Some of the answers I had have already been said as well, including instant runoff voting. I don't know the laws or the regulations behind it, but my understanding is that because there's no primary process for independents, the contribution limits are a little bit different that individual donors can give to independents versus party candidates because there's not two separate election cycles. But really, I think that people are perhaps frustrated with the election process because they're actually more frustrated with the parties themselves and the perception that there's nothing actually being done and nothing getting accomplished. I know that local government is a lot different than state government or federal government, but Bangor and the city were officially a nonpartisan board with 3 Republicans, 3 independents, 3 Democrats, and for the most part people get along fairly well. I think that Maine is a unique state in that there's a lot of fiscally conservative Democrats and a lot of socially progressive or socially libertarian Republicans. So I think that people get frustrated at times seeing the parties kind of butt heads because most people in Maine, I think, actually don't fit neatly in either party. So whether it's frustration with the election process, whether it's frustration with the parties themselves, I'm not exactly sure how to break that down, but some of the answers you said earlier about instant runoff voting and fair, less gerrymandered districts, not just in Maine, but countrywide, I think it's crucial.
All right. Thank you. Barbara.
Sure.
Okay. Fire away.
Well, just to say that it's interesting that the panelists who are party members are saying that elections are working, that there are no dramatic problems.
Not all of them.
But, okay, thank you for reminding me of that. But there is a different opinion among independents, I think, and the parties do control the rules of the elections, so you would probably be happier with them than not. And as for Ben Sprague's comment on the difference in funding for independent candidates, I believe the contribution limits are the same, but a party candidate can get a contribution for the primary and for the general. So basically they can raise twice the amount of money as an independent, even if they do not have an opponent in the primary election. So people criticize an independent for making their own private personal contributions to their campaign, but that's about the only way they can equalize the amount of money they have to spend on an election.
All right. Anybody else feel the urge? Okay. You've had your say on that one. Let's move on to Jill's question. The parties currently control the election dialogue, even though there is an independent in the gubernatorial race. Do you think it should be a best standard to include an independent along with party representatives in print, radio, and TV sessions where elections are being discussed, such as agree to disagree or across the aisle? And Jill, it's your question. You go first.
All right. I want to give marks to Maine Public Radio because they've recently added Senator Dick Woodbury to their political conversation between Cynthia Dill, Democrat, and
Dan Demerit.
Thank you, Dan Demerit, Republican. So that's great because otherwise, for instance, the agree to disagree that's in the blog and in the newspaper and on TV, you have party candidates discussing an election in which there is an independent, and yet that there is no one there representing that candidate or a non-party perspective. So the party candidates can pretty much say whatever they want about that person, and there's no one there to rebut any of those comments. So that's why I feel strongly that, especially when there is an independent in a race, there should be an opportunity for all of those segments of the voting population to be represented in the conversation.
All right. Ben Grant.
Well, I think it totally depends on what the forum is and what the point is. I mean, I was on Channel 6 yesterday with Chairman Bennett from the Republican Party, where we talked about the whole ticket and all the races. And there aren't not all the races have non-party candidates in them. You know, when a race comes up, you know, if they want to talk about the gubernatorial campaign and have the candidates on, of course they should have all the candidates on at the same time. But you know, there's larger issues than just one independent candidate. There are more issues that we might have to talk about than an independent candidate might be relevant for in terms of the races we're talking about.
All right, Jason?
I think I need to dig a little bit deeper into the question on whether it's a best standard or best practice or a requirement. Because if there's any attempt, as a Republican, if there's any attempt to impose some sort of requirement of anybody on the airways, if it's a private, we're talking, you know, Agree to Disagree, which is a blog, a privately owned newspaper run by two private individuals, you know, in the arena, something like that, private companies. I don't think we should. I think that flies in the face of everything we think about the press and the freedom of the press in the country. If you're talking best practices, like what we would all say we would like to see, without it being, you know, codified and forced upon private individuals, is that more like what we're talking about?
Well, isn't it a requirement that, for instance, when the governor gives his weekly commentary on the state of the state, that the other party gets an opportunity to respond? Isn't that a fair?
What I'm asking is not that. It's, you're talking about independence, and you're talking about sort of. Are you saying that the Bangor Daily News should be required to include an independent perspective?
I'm saying that they should be required to, if they're required to have a counterbalancing voice between the parties. If there's no requirement there, then I agree. There should be no requirement to allow an independent. But if there is a requirement for fair and balanced to allow the opposite party to respond to something said by one party, then the requirement should be for an independent.
My perspective on it is if it's a private enterprise of any sort, that there should not be any requirement, and that those private enterprises, private writers, private media personalities will choose what's best for the audience and the market they're trying to reach, because they're actually doing that. You know, it's freedom of enterprise. It's the ability to make a living, and I don't think anybody in our position in government or the parties or anywhere has the right to tell them what they can or can't do in that regard. As far as do I think it's a best practice, I think it would be great that they would include those viewpoints on issues where it's relevant. But as Ben said, there are, you know, a handful of unenrolled independent candidates running in the state senate. So if we're talking about a senate, if we're talking about Kerry Weston running against Dr. Goldwaith here in Bangor, and they're going to be doing an interview, I don't know how you inject an independent perspective into a direct election-related conversation. But again, anything that imposes on private enterprise, private, you know, free enterprise, you know, geared and privately owned and run businesses, I don't support anybody in government telling them what they have to do with their freedom.
Yeah, and you know what they say, freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. The only law that I'm aware of has to do with election law, and that is if any media outlet chooses to sell space or time to a given candidate in a given race, they are required to make that same time available at the same rate to the opposing candidate or candidates. But otherwise, I think they have been reluctant to delve into our First Amendment rights to air whatever we want to air.
I hope we keep it that way. And I don't think MSNBC would really want to have Republican Fox.
Or Fox News. Yeah, let's be fair.
They would be, everybody, all the executives of those channels would be in jail if they had to comply with some sort of requirement.
Yeah, and CNN doesn't know the difference. They haven't quite figured out who they are yet. Okay, let's move on to, see, that was, Jason, did you had your shot at that, so we're down to Ben Sprague.
The points that have been made, I don't really disagree with at all. I think that there's certainly businesses have the right to decide their own practices. You get into some really interesting questions about media ethics here and media responsibility, though. I do believe that if you go back decades when the airwaves were originally granted to television stations and radio stations, there was kind of a tacit understanding that they would try to maintain sort of some balanced integrity in their reporting, and that's why all the networks will broadcast the State of the Union address, for example. But as for having an independent voice, I think there would need to be some minimal level of independent relevance in a particular race. But in an ideal world, I would love to see independents have an equal say, but I'm just not sure it's feasible at this point.
Can I get a quick, I don't actually want to rebut, but I want to add something to it if I can.
Can we let Betsy jump in
Oh,
here
I'm sorry,
first?
Betsy, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
And then we will come right back to you, Jason.
Well, I'm just going to take this in an entirely different direction and talk about the presidential debates, because our last two presidential candidates have gotten arrested trying to get in on the presidential debates. When the League of Women Voters was running them, it was a 15% level in the polls, I think. And now that this presidential commission that's owned and operated by the Republican and the Democratic Party is running them, then small party candidates don't have access to them at all. And I think that's wrong. I think that the more voices we have at the table, the better. And as Greens, we understand that we're not going to win a lot of elections. We're probably not going to win any elections. But we do want our voice at the table. We want our issues to be heard. And this is a forum, a very good forum, for our issues to be heard. And the fact that Dr. Stein was arrested outside of the last presidential debates trying to participate, that doesn't seem like democracy to me.
All right, thank you. Jason, continue.
Yeah,
I got some follow-ups.
Oh, okay, all right.
I just want to say, we can talk about the fairness doctrine and broadcast and all that, but if you actually go back to way back, the time when the nation was founded, a lot of the newspapers were very, very sort of partisan and harsh. And so if we're really going to look at historical, take a historic perspective and look at precedent, then a lot of times in the past our press has been very, very partisan. And it's most of the tinkering has happened in the last century or so with that.
Ben.
I just want to follow up, and it just occurred to me something that Jill said really resonates with me, and that I think she used the phrase independent perspective. Well, what is that? I would represent to you that you couldn't define that. The body of independents in Maine, unenrolled voters in Maine, are made up of have a wide range, a wide variety of viewpoints. And I don't know that you could identify a person to represent all those people. I think it's a lot easier to do that with a party because they're coalesced around certain values. I see Mr. Richardson's here, and I know he has widely different views from people who are more progressive leaning, who are not enrolled in the Democratic Party. So to say that you can find a person to represent the independent perspective, I think is kind of a fool's errand, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, Ben Sprague, were you
I'm good.
waving a hand? Okay.
Some of the news coverage or was at our convention, we see people with great diversity of ideas and beliefs that work together because, we have found over our recent history that you can unite around things like freedom and economic prosperity. And as the Democrats have done, others have done in the past, and we can work together on those things. So, the premise or the assumption that we're just always this sort of fractured civil war status is just not correct.
Okay, good. All right, let's move on to your question. And I have to assume that you wrote this because if the governor had written this, it would have been much shorter and definitely to the point. Not that this isn't. And it goes like this. As you may know, there is a push for a 2015 state referendum to dramatically increase the amount of clean elections, taxpayer funding of political campaigns here in Maine. These increased funds would likely pay for more bumper stickers, lawn signs, radio ads, I hope radio ads now that I have my new job, and glossy mailers. Don't forget us when you're out there buying time. What is a more important priority? Using scarce Maine taxpayer dollars to help care for truly needy people, funding our schools, public safety, and infrastructure, or dramatically increasing the amount of taxpayer funding given to political candidates to run for office? Jason.
I knew that I was probably in the room I was going to be in today. I was putting blood in the water on this question. But I think it's an important discussion to have, so I was willing to step forward and kind of do it. I think we're at a point with state budgets, you can look here and look at other places. We have learned over time that we do have a problem with maintaining revenue and a balance between our revenue and our expenditures. And there's always a demand by dozens or more special interest groups to increase funding for various things, while at the same time we're struggling to fund our schools and our roads and our police officers and fire departments. So my question is, specifically asking, after providing sort of my perspective in the opening of the question, is what's the priority? You know, is it a priority to force it to, I'm not opposing the referendum process itself, but is that a priority when you show up at the ballot box and you're thinking about whether your local school has the funding it needs, or whether your local legislative candidates from both parties, one of which you probably don't agree with, are going to have more money to pay for their lawn signs and their radio ads? I think it's a valuable question that we can all learn something from when we think about it in the perspective of what's most important. Should taxpayers be funding the lawn signs of both candidates, one of which they don't agree with, as opposed to textbooks or laptops or making sure we keep the right number of teachers in our schools? I think we all need to think about that. So I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say.
Okay, well, let's start with Ben Sprague.
Well, as a municipal elected leader, I can tell you that our schools, fire departments, and roads are not being adequately funded. And it's not because of the glossy mailings and the yard signs. It's about conscious decisions that have been made in Augusta to draw revenue to Augusta instead of to the local level. And it's been a sucking sound away from municipalities over the last 10, 20 years or more, where funding used to stay at a local level, which I would say is actually a Republican ideal, local control, local tax dollars. But this governor in particular, as mayor of Waterville, called revenue sharing, I can't remember the terms he used, I think some of the terms he used aren't appropriate, as mixed company to say, but he was very much in favor of revenue sharing, and now as governor he calls it municipal welfare, and calls it wasteful spending. So I would say that this question is sort of a false choice to say we can either have clean election funding or we can have properly paved roads and properly funded schools. I know that there's a lot of difficult decisions that need to be made with budgets at every level of government right now. I'm certainly not suggesting that we just throw money into every willy-nilly thing that comes along, but I do think that there's a role for clean elections financing in the state of Maine. I think the role that money has in politics right now is that it has a large chilling effect on political participation, that it drives some people out or prevents some people from getting involved. So I'll be honest, I don't really know the rules of campaign finance in the state. It's not something that I've really thought about a lot before, but I did want to reject the false choice and say that if we did want our schools, roads, and fire departments to properly be funded, it would mean more tax dollars staying locally instead of going to the state, which is the case now.
All right, thank you. Betsy?
Well, I just think it's real interesting that that certain people think that we shouldn't be spending money on clean elections, and yet 80% of the candidates run on clean elections. So if they think, well, it's gone down. It has gone down. These are the numbers I can find. But the thing is that if we want to get money out of politics and we want to have special interests not having the ears of our legislators all the time, then we need to have clean elections funding for, I think, for all candidates, but I know you can't mandate that. When I ran as a clean candidate, I saw that as an opportunity to demonstrate to my constituents, which not my constituents, but to the people in my district, that I could use state funds in a reasonable and economic and frugal way. And so I ended up turning back a lot of the funds to the state. I didn't use them all. I didn't do a lot of glossy mailers. I didn't do more yard signs than I really needed. I didn't spend money on radio ads in northwestern Waldo County where not very many radio signals reach. I mean, I think that you can use the Clean Elections Fund as a way to demonstrate that you would be fiscally responsible as the people's representative in Augusta. And I firmly believe that we need to get the corporate money out of politics, and this is the way to do it. And it's really not that big a chunk of the state budget. And I suppose it would fix a few things, but I think it's more important to have elections open to people who could not otherwise afford to run, and have a broader representation at the state level.
Thank you. Jill?
I think I'm with Jason on this one. When I was a girl, we didn't have clean elections when I ran for office, and so that wasn't an alternative. And I think my first election, maybe I spent just under $20,000. My last one I spent $6,000, and my margins were increasing. So it didn't seem to me that money was the critical factor. However, candidates are now being overwhelmed by all kinds of spending that has been enabled at the federal level. And I don't think we can increase clean election funding enough to balance what happens with candidates that are not clean election candidates. And the number of people using the clean election system is decreasing rather remarkably over just the last few years, basically since Citizens United. So I don't think that we can continue to just pump more money into clean elections and create a level playing field. Hence, I think where we have to fix it is at the Citizens United and removing the caps and all level. But you know, that's hard. That's a bigger arena, way bigger, and it's going to be very difficult to do. But I think that has to be the ultimate solution, rather than put more and more public dollars into clean election funding. I think that every political ad should have, I don't care who the treasurer of your campaign is, it should say in 1-inch font across the bottom, stop and think. Because most of these ads that are flooding the market are ridiculous for candidates. There's things that are being written by out-of-state interests and so on. And people somehow accept those at face value, rather than saying, wait a minute, I know this guy who's running for office. I don't think he would do that. I don't think he thinks that. But people seem to just say, did you hear what this guy did? Without thinking about, could that possibly be true, or calling the candidate and asking if it's true. So stop and think is the motto, and public financing, I am less supportive of now.
All right, thank you. Ben Grant, you have been patient.
I have been.
You look like you wanted to respond immediately
You
after Jason's
go last, be patient, collect my thoughts. First of all, the problem here in Maine has nothing to do, it does have everything to do with the courts, but it has nothing to do with Citizens United. It has to do with the decision that eliminated our ability to provide matching funds, which was a way that allowed clean elections candidates to help deal with private financing spent against them. The referendum that's being proposed deals exactly with that problem. It has a very elegant solution where clean elections candidates can go out and collect more $5 checks and receive more public financing for their campaigns. For that reason alone, I support the referendum. I definitely want to continue to support clean elections as a whole for this reason. It's a reason it didn't come up already. It allows us a greater ability to recruit people to run for office. There are a lot of people who are dissuaded from running just by the fact that they're having to go out and raise money. And when you give them an option like this, it allows them, at least definitely psychologically, get over that barrier. Yes, I can actually run for office and I can do this. So it's a great recruiting tool. So for that reason, I'll keep supporting it. Just tie this back to where Jason started. I mean, I'd be much more impressed with his argument if I thought this money was going to go back into caring for needy people, fighting for public schools, public safety, and so forth and so on. I think we've seen from this administration that that's not where the money is going to go. In fact, the reason we have a problem maintaining revenue is that they've sent all the revenue away. They've given tax breaks to mostly wealthy people here in Maine. So I think that the bumper stickers, lawn signs, radio ads, and glossy mailers are essential to a candidate to explain their positions on these very issues. And I think we want the voters to have as much information that they can have about candidates' positions on roads, public safety, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's money well spent. I'll continue to support it in the referendum. I'm sure Jason wants to jump in.
Yeah, I think he
I'm
does.
gonna go for a real quick bullet list if I can. I do not believe it's a false choice because every dollar that is not spent by government on clean elections is available somewhere else. It's a matter of the magnitude we're talking about when we're talking about matching funds, a huge sum of money being spent, and matching funds that could end up being a very, very large pool of money. Could be talking $5 to $7 million. That's not a false choice. That's $5 to $7 million. It could be available to our schools, our elderly, people in need, our first responders. That could be a handful of devices to help firefighters find people in burning buildings. The question did not propose abolition of the clean elections. We're talking about increasing the funding. So there was some sort of question, I think Jill or Betsy. It's not about abolishing the system. It's about whether we're going to add a lot more money to it. So I'm not sitting here in a position of saying it needs to be abolished. I'm saying, can we afford to increase the amount of money being spent? The matching funds, question was really, really a hard one, because you really could get in trouble if you leave that, the barn door open on that. And income tax revenue from the governor's tax cuts is actually, I think it's created about $279 million in new revenue, so we're not actually losing money because of income tax cuts. Thank you.
Okay, anybody motivated? No. Okay, then let's move on to Ben Sprague's question. The 113th Congress was officially the least productive Congress in history. What factors do you think contributed to this rating? Ben?
Well, I first want to apologize to the group that I have to leave after this question. I have to fulfill some city council duty at the Cross Center at 1:15, so I do apologize. I want to thank Joe Pickering for organizing this panel. I think he's a fine citizen to be so involved with this topic and to put these things together. On this question, I think what people are concerned about when they look at the parties right now is the notion that if one party proposes something, the other party has to automatically be opposed to it. If a Republican proposes some reform, the Democratic Party automatically seems to take the opposite view, and vice versa. There used to be, it seems, some more overlap in Washington and Augusta, where you'd have a center-left Dem that was actually more conservative than the most moderate Republican. It was kind of a Venn diagram with some considerable crossover in the middle, and people could seem like they got along better and got more things done. The last Congress, I don't know what the final number was on legislation they passed, but it was next to nothing in the 113th Congress. So I think that's the basic problem of partisanship right now, is that the two parties seem to be more concerned about tearing each other down rather than actually solving any problems and actually working together. It's very easy to be opposed to someone else's idea, but it's harder to replace that idea with a new, better idea. And it seems like really what the two parties are trying to do is just attack one another. I would add too that I think in Washington in particular, maybe not Augusta, but in Washington I think the gig has gotten too good. The salary, the benefits, the perks, people once they get into office, they care more about preserving that office. The one thing it seems like Democrats and Republicans have in common in Washington is that they're all trying to preserve their own butts in capital. And I think that the disjointed nature of what's going on in Washington and all that money, all that power, the real struggles that regular Americans and families are going through right now, that gap is widening and it's contributing to the increased frustration level that people have with the two political parties.
All right, thank you. Betsy?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a lot of the things we talked about in my question, that the political process has become so polarized because of the gerrymandered districts, because of the money in politics. You know, it's people, you know, they know that if they don't toe the most radical edges of their party line, they're going to get primaried, and so it's keeping the discourse very fresh. It's not even discourse anymore. I mean, they're hardly even talking to each other because they're so afraid, as Ben said, of losing their really good gig. You know, if they're not millionaires when they go to Congress, they sure are pretty quickly after that. And who wants to give that up? And so the reform of campaign finances, the reform of redistricting, all of these things would help bring IRV, which would allow people to rank their candidates, and it has been shown in the places that it's used that it keeps the discourse much more civil, because you don't want to be bad mouthing someone whose vote who might, you know, whose voters might rank you second. You know, you don't want to say really bad things about them. So it keeps the discourse more civil, and I think that it would be one of the ways that we could fix the broken system.
All right, thank you. Jill?
Well, I don't have much to add. I think it's sad the lack of ability of Congress to get anything done, basically, and I think the reasons have been cited, and I believe that open primaries would go a long way helping with that problem. And I know Grant said, well, all you do is join the party and vote in the primary. I don't want to join the party, and I don't think I should have to in order to participate unless the party want to take that offline, do their conventions and all at their expense, have their elections at their expense. That's a different story.
Okay, thank you. Ben Grant.
Well, I'm going to tee one up for my friend Jason here. I got to give a partisan answer to this one. I'm sure he'll disagree with it, but I think Congress is unproductive because that's the goal of the Republican Party right now. I think they made a conscious decision when Obama was elected to give him no success. And they have engaged in a path to not grant him any victories. I think the other contributing factor is the rise of the Tea Party, and they have eliminated most of the moderate Republicans from the respective caucuses. I don't think there is a willing dance partner on the right side of the aisle right now for the Washington.
All right. Jason?
I think actually the polarization started when President Obama had supermajorities and did exactly what he wanted to do, including Obamacare, and caused the backlash that created the Tea Party. And I think it's a direct result of the economic pain that average Americans all across the country have felt as a result of the policies that have been put, that actually happened, before President Obama, before President Bush, and some cases during, I think it's the polarization a lot of times is a result of decades of bad policy that has caused real pain. At the same time, President Obama forged ahead with Obamacare without a single Republican vote in Congress. And I think that you can look back and very clearly see the rise of that, the backlash of that. And I think that was the start of this. So while Ben, his perspective is that it's a reaction to President Obama's existence as the president, my take is that it's a direct reaction to President Obama's actions as a president and the policies that people rejected, which was, primary. It was actually bailouts, which happened that everybody's, a lot of people voted on, both parties. But then Obamacare, which was a very divisive, and a lot of older Americans especially felt like they were losing control of their health care. So I think that's, the genesis of the division that occurred. Going forward, I think that, there's the size of the problems that we have are a big reason. People really feel the pain, and people feel passionately about what it takes to fix their problems. They identify with the party, and we now can interact with our elected officials a lot more regularly than we could in the future. In the past, and I think transparency. I think everybody needs to know better what's going on. One of my sort of big ideas is some way to actually have citizen, monitors reporting back to the people in a congressional district or a Senate district about what's actually happening, not controlled by the politicians in office. And I think that if we had a level of transparency there, that would help.
All right, anybody have any additional thoughts? Okay, we are really doing well on time, and I think it's time to turn the end of this session over to the patron saint of these forums. I don't know what the Latin is, fora? Anyway, yeah, Barbara's not going to give me a hard time. Joe Pickering, would you please hold forth?
No, it doesn't matter. Well, first of all, I'm disappointed there isn't some questions from the audience, and if you folks would be willing to do that. I think we can go a little longer, but I'd just like to make this comment. First of all, I really want to thank everybody for doing this, and one, I'm not sure, my wife would call me patron saint, but
Patron.
that's right. But in terms of a lot of people, including the parties, and I have to be a party member, and non-party members, independents are, put a lot of time and effort, and I really think that is absolutely wonderful. I tell you though, Maine needs to face its future, and I think the future is, one, what's happening in terms of the declining membership nationwide, Democrats and Republicans, it is breaking down. You've got lawsuits across the country. You've got citizen referendums who want to see nonpartisan primaries develop. You've got a whole variety of things. You've got, in Maine, we're at 37% independents, but the reality is it's 42% nationwide, and the most populous state is now, a couple of years ago, turned to a nonpartisan system. And I really feel that we in Maine should at least give some serious thought to it. You know, I intend, and you folks can all delete it, I intend to send you information periodically. And you can all delete it, but I do hope you read it. And I know we can't think about this for November because we have a thunderstorm of labels coming over the next several months. But the thunderstorm's going to end, and we need to come together as Mainers and at least explore the option. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Thank everybody. This was another great session. I think we are right on time, Barbara.
Good job.
So you are welcome to go get that lunch you didn't have time for because you came here. Oh. You all have time?
Yep.
Are there additional questions, or have we covered all the bases?
Question.
Yes, fire away.
Betsy, if I may. Thank you to
Always
everybody.
me first. They did this happen last time too.
You said ranked choice voting was working well everywhere. Can you
I didn't-
cite one or two places where it's
I
working
didn't
well?
say it was working well everywhere. I think it's working well in the places where it's being used. San Francisco is
Oh,
using it.
that's trying to get rid of it. How can you say it's working well there?
Well, certainly,
Minority
I'm sure certain
population
people are trying to get rid of it.
loudly that they don't understand how to work it and can't inculcate it in their system. I can't see
I'm
any
not-
strength of it.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a steep learning curve for people, because it would be very different from the, pick, winner takes all. But I think Maine is ripe for it right now with what happened in the last election. I mean, everybody gets that this government was chosen by a minority of, small minority of the voters. And so I think that, that there are teachable moments, and I think this may be one here. So.
And the man who helped bring about the result of the last gubernatorial election is ready to speak.
First of all, when we talk about a steep learning curve for people in elections, I think one of the things the voters of Maine have spoken about is that they want the ballots to be very accessible. There was that just a couple of years ago, there was a referendum. I wasn't at our party at the time, but our party was on the side of that lost. And we're talking about something that, and if it's so complicated that people are having a hard time using it in other places, I think that we should really think about that. And Betsy expressed that there would be a steep learning curve. Well, how many steep learning curves will we let people fall off before we say maybe this isn't working? Maybe there's some value that we need to consider. The second thing is Governor Baldacci was never elected to the majority either. So on both sides of the political ideological spectrum, the elections have resulted in the same type of the same result. So my feeling on the whole majority vote versus instant runoff and all this, and electing plurality elected governors, is that it feels like a lot of times whoever's whining or complaining the loudest about that is the one who lost the last election where there was that kind of result. But I think it means we have to admit that that's been something that's been happening here for a while.
Which is exactly why we should go to instant runoff, so that we stop having in the systems that have worked. It's been pretty clear that the campaigns are more civil, and the candidates work harder to build a consensus among all the people, rather than having someone in the Blaine House that only got 36% of the vote, whether it's Baldacci or LePage.
I would just ask you to provide evidence of your claim that there's more civility or anything else. I'd love to see the actual proof of that.
I'll send you one.
To me, what's more important is what are the results? I mean, having a 50% governor is fine in the abstract, but is the product any better or worse? I mean, Governor King was elected with less of a percentage, I think, than Governor LePage was the first time, and he oversaw a period of great, I think, success and expansion here in Maine, and he was elected with 36% of the vote. So I don't know that the fact of a minority elected governor, a governor elected with a minority electorate necessarily means you end up with that product. I mean, I don't think we can just change rules because we're irritated with the most recent election.
So, Ben Grant has made a fascinating proposal here for proportional leadership in the Maine House and Senate. And I'm kidding because that was actually my question, but it got listed under, under Ben's name.
That's my
I wouldn't have taken credit for it.
There is, I think, a case to be made for something other than winner take all. Now, that's obviously difficult in the gubernatorial election. But in a legislative election, the year the Senate famously divided and I was the independent in an otherwise evenly divided Senate, the most important thing that came out of that, in my opinion, is that they shared committee chairmanships. So you had 8 Bs and 8 Rs and 1 independent, sharing the committees. Every morning before the session starts, those people get together to talk about how the day is going to go. Normally, it is Democrats or Republicans, whoever is the majority party. In that year, they were together in one room every morning, talking about what was going to get run for bills, what we anticipated was going to be a major debate. I think that made a big difference. So my suggestion is that as long as the minority party reaches some threshold, like 25%, 33%, there should be proportional leadership of the legislature, because everyone then has a greater stake in its success. Now the minority party stake is making majority party fail, and that's what we talked about at the federal level. But if they are more invested in the process, chair at least some of the committees, and participate in those management discussions of how the body is operating, then I think everybody has a bigger stake in success than they do now.
Well, I think the wisdom of that was undeniable, so we should thank the people who made it happen, like Joe Goldwaith and Rick Bennett and Mike Bishop.
All right, we have a very patient gentleman back here. Please ask your question.
Hi, Blaine Richardson. I just recently, I'd say 12, 14 weeks ago, left the Republican Party. I have collected, I'm running as an independent for 2nd District, and I'm only using that as a preface. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for being here, because it shows that there are people that do care about the process here in Maine. And that's really important, because we have a lot of people that don't participate. Now, having said that, I have collected personally 1,700 signatures, and one of the common denominators with voters that I meet, and it doesn't matter what party, they're fed up with both parties, gentlemen, and not so much here in Maine, but at a national level. I'd like to make that very clear. We're different creatures up here. No one's holding anybody accountable in Washington. And we have 2 parties that right now, in my estimation, are just sort of passing the ball back and forth. And I can clearly tell you the message I'm getting from people, and it's the same feeling I have. I do not trust my federal government anymore. And I can tell you, as a United States Navy captain, 30 years of service, I know what I'm talking about. Now, our election process here in Maine, it isn't quite easy. It doesn't matter how you run. But what I would like to see is, a level playing field. It is not level for, minority parties. I'm having a good time collecting 2,000 signatures instead of the people I'll be running against having to get 1,000. However, it's an opportunity to meet people. So I guess, my question to the 2 party representatives here is, what does each corporation, the Republican corporation and the Democratic corporation, because that's what these parties truly are, what do they do to enhance the voter here in the state of Maine that an independent that is not affiliated with a party has to offer?
Thank you for that.
Can I answer?
Yeah, I think he was talking to you.
To the question of 1,000 signatures versus 2,000 signatures, when our candidate has to go get the signatures, they have to do it only from Republicans, or you actually have a pool of people who get the signatures from this. So in any room, like a mixed room like this, you can get signatures from everybody, where we have to go through the hoops of like making sure they're Republicans. So it's half as many but twice as hard. I think in the end it ends up being the same. And then you don't have to actually go through a primary election. It goes to the same question about us raising more money with our candidates. Well, we can raise $1,500 in primary, but our primary, they have to spend that money. So it's not like they can always just be stockpiling it. Not if it's uncontested, but there are times when they spend it. So those two things, we're talking about, that level playing field is probably a lot more level than we're actually, the laws were designed so that the difficulty may be higher, or the threshold may be higher, but the difficulty isn't as tough for the independent candidates in some regard. So on that. And then the second part of the question about what do we do to enhance the independent voter? Is that
Any voter in Maine.
Well,
What does the corporation, because make no mistake, both parties are corporations.
But what is the question, what do we do for the voter? How do we make voters' lives better? I mean,
Yeah,
what's your
well, the
question?
two corporations sort of control the discussion, I guess is the best way.
I think people control the discussion, but I want to answer the question, but I'm wondering, what do we do for the voters? How do,
What's the value added?
to the voter?
What's
For
the
us?
appeal?
What's what?
What's the appeal?
What's the appeal? Why should I be a Republican or why should I be a Democrat?
Okay, so why should,
Yeah.
that's more easy, I can understand. You should be a Republican because you believe in free markets and individual responsibility and individual freedom. And
I believe in that as an independent.
And you and I agree on those things. Blaine and I know each other, so I can't like sit here and go through. But, that's what I believe and that's what our party believes, and that's what we fight for. Keeping government out of the places in people's lives where it has no business being, is what I believe in, and that's what I think we bring as a value. And,
How about women?
well, actually, we're really working to appeal to women and talk about, whether it's a young lady getting out of high school or college and wanting to get a good job, to a soccer mom who wants to make sure that she can balance the family budget and afford to get the kids to the games, to a middle-aged woman who's making a decision about putting her mother in a nursing home and making sure we're funding the nursing home
What about if
adequately.
she wants to make her own reproductive choice?
I personally am not in this game to tell you that I have my beliefs, but the way our party sits right now, we're not out trying to impose. No, you can say what you want about the national party or a few individuals that you see on TV, but that I'm not. I can't sit here and look at you. I'm not going to sit
There
here.
are bills in every session from your party members.
There are, but
To do that.
as if you want.
Could you have that debate maybe another time?
Yeah, that might. But
Ben Grant, did you want to respond to this question? I think we have a gentleman back here who has
I'm going to answer
another
Blaine
question.
too. He asked me too. He's clearly trying to cast the party as a corporation, some pejorative term that a lot of people in my party use for other purposes. Our party is made up of regular people who have regular jobs or are retired, decide to dedicate their time, their precious time, to work on this project. And this project, I think, elections and government is a collective action, and you can't do it alone. You need people to come along with you, whether it's to get elected, whether it's to pound in your signs, or whether it's to vote with you on a particular issue when you get there. So we offer structure and organization to achieve those ends. And I think you want to join the Democratic Party if you see your values reflected in what we are. You probably don't. You're probably more aligned with the other party, though obviously you've left it. But that's what the party has to offer. It's a vehicle for people to participate, and it's a vehicle for us to distribute and project the message that's reflected from our values.
All right.
And I just want to say there are 3 parties represented up here. But thank you for not lumping us with the 2 corporate parties. I do appreciate that.
No guilt by association there.
You can come to any of our meetings, and I don't think you'll think it looks much like a corporation.
Sir, did you still have a question?
I do have a question for both Ben and Jason. I just want to get some clarification on independent candidates and what they offer to the election.
You don't have a question?
I do.
Oh, okay. Can you get right to the question?
I
We're
did.
starting to run out of time.
I just asked them to clarify, if they could please, the value of an independent candidate to an election, say for state senate or for Congress or for any other, because as far as the messaging Betsy was talking about being able to participate, isn't that what the American dream is, to have a variety of opinions to choose from, as opposed to just having 2?
I'm not opposed to independent candidates. I'm opposed to changing the rules of the elections from what they are now. I don't mind having other candidates on the ballot. Everyone has the right to run, but whether you run or not it doesn't mean it's a good idea. I mean, you have to make a choice. If you're a third party, non-party candidate, and you're trying to run for office, and you're worried about somebody being elected with less than 50%, well, that should be a factor in whether you decide to run or not. I mean, I'm fine with independent candidates. They can offer differences. They can offer something voters something new. I just don't want to change the rules.
But I think maybe I should clarify just a tad bit more, was having access to, like Maine PBN finally got Senator Youngblood in. Should the third party be even considered in any discussions, or independent be considered? I mean, obviously, I know there's some fringe candidates out there. We've had them here in Maine, but there's some people who are pretty reasonable who can offer some suggestions and offer some variety of opinions and different ways of doing things that kind of step outside both parties. I'm just from what I've
Questions
heard.
are piling up here. Jason, did you want to?
The real answer is the value that an independent candidate brings to an election or discussion is entirely dependent upon the value of that independent person and their contribution to the conversation or the election. There is no blanket answer that's right. An independent who has a lot to add will enhance that a lot. An independent who doesn't will not add a thing to it.
Got it.
Okay, we have one more question here.
Just one question. All right, regarding party participation, and really I would like your response to, since 2010, both the two parties, the Democrat Party has lost around 20,000 participating voters, and the Republican Party has lost about 15,000. That's 35,000, party voters that have just completely left the system, whether unenrolled, whether they moved out, whatever. I guess the reaction of saying that, we want more participation in that, I would like your responses to, why do you think those people left your parties, and what you would do to get those people back?
Go first.
My take is that a lot of what we're losing is based on some things at the national level. So when I hear a lot of people that are upset with anything that's going on in our party, it's primarily geared around what they're actually seeing on the TV news and things like that. And I don't think that the people, we've lost some people that are close to the party, in Maine, but I think that it's been, a lot of it has to do, when we talk about those numbers, it has to do with somebody being upset with something that's happening at the national level. I think we have to do a lot of work to bring people in and have real conversations, and we've done a lot of that. We still want to get people, back involved, and we value all of those voices. But I think that one of the major reasons if there's a migration of registered voters, I think that the stuff at the national level has caused some real discontent on both sides of the aisle. But the job in Maine and in the legislature and in Augusta, I think there's a different dynamic in some ways. We still fight, we still make our cases on things, but I think our party's still a lot more focused on individuals and individual freedoms, and some of the fights we've had and won in the last legislature, I think are good evidence of that, and much more significant to the lives of Maine people than any bill that might have failed in this U.S. Senate or something like that.
I think for all the talk about electoral systems and process and parties, I think the voters are more attuned to results. And I think people about the Democratic Party, this is where I get to take a look in the mirror too. I don't think we've given people good enough results when we've had the chance. Are our schools better? Are the roads better? Is the economy better? If the Democratic Party is in charge and is in power and have the ability to make change on the key issues that influence people's lives and their communities, and we achieve things that people can feel, they feel are real, and that are making their lives better and their community better, I think people will join the Democratic Party and help promote the Democratic Party. If we don't do that, then they're naturally gonna break away. We don't have any special hold over people. We have a hold over them only insofar as we're doing what we should do and doing things that they think are helping them. So I think we just need to do a better job governing when we have the chance. I think that's what will bring people back ultimately.
All right.
And we're growing.
Yeah, that's where they're all going, is the YouTube. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to the league and to Joe Pickering, and especially the panelists. Thank you very much.
Get in touch with me. Lost. It's gonna happen.
I started asking myself, loyal to a brand,
Ms. Collins was on.
values and beliefs. What's interesting about not being an anything, but you can be a very complex individual. That's from the beginning of my origins. I went to a rally for the go-go. And you know what drives me nuts? I've had it before. Both of these movies are gatekeepers of the monster.
Oh, I just heard it. I didn't know.
Ghostbusters. And it got involved. I couldn't go to medical school because of that.